She was the girl nobody noticed, the one who refilled water glasses and disappeared into the walls. But the moment she opened her mouth and spoke a language that hadn't been heard in New York since the blood feuds of 1980, every dangerous man in that room stopped breathing, because they all realized the same terrifying thing at the exact same time. The shy little waitress knew exactly who they were, and worse, they had absolutely no idea who she was. The trick to being invisible is simple. You never make eye contact, you never laugh too loudly, you never spill a single drop, and you never, under any circumstances, let anyone remember your face. Sarah Conti had mastered this art over 4 long years of waitressing at Caruso's, one of the most expensive and quietly dangerous restaurants in all of Manhattan. She had perfected the glide, that smooth, almost ghost-like movement through a crowded dining room where she could set down a bread basket, refill a glass, and vanish again without a single diner breaking their conversation. She was furniture. She was wallpaper. She was a shadow in a black dress and a white apron. And that was exactly how she needed it to be. She was 24 years old, but she looked younger. She kept her dark chestnut hair pulled back so tightly it gave her a headache by noon every day. She wore thick-framed glasses that were 2 sizes too big for her face. And she hunched her shoulders just slightly, just enough to shave 2 inches off her height. She had spent 4 years carefully, methodically making herself smaller, quieter, and easier to forget. Because Sarah Conti was not her real name, and the life she had built in this tiny corner of New York was balanced on a thread so thin that one wrong look, one wrong word, one flicker of recognition from the wrong pair of eyes could unravel everything in an instant. She lived alone in a studio apartment in Astoria, Queens. It was the size of a large closet. The radiator banged and hissed through the winter, and the ceiling fan wobbled dangerously in the summer. But it was hers, and more importantly, it was anonymous. Nobody came looking for people in Astoria. Nobody important, anyway. She sent $200 every week to a care home in New Jersey where her grandmother lived. It was everything she could spare after rent, food, and the monthly cost of being nobody. Being nobody, it turned out, was not cheap. She had one friend, a bartender named Rosa, who worked the same shifts and never asked questions. Rosa had once said that Sarah seemed like a woman who had already lived 3 lives before this one. Sarah had laughed and changed the subject. Saturday nights at Caruso's were the worst and the best. Worst because the room was always packed with the kind of men who expected perfection and punished anything less. Best because the tips were extraordinary, the kind of tips that kept her grandmother's room paid for and kept the wolves from her door for another week. But this particular Saturday, something was different. She felt it the moment she walked into the staff entrance at 5 in the afternoon. The kitchen was too quiet. The sous chefs were moving with their heads down. The floor manager, a tightly wound man named Vincent, was pacing near the hostess stand, checking his phone every 30 seconds. "Something is happening tonight," Rosa whispered, sliding Sarah a glass of water at the bar. "Big table, private room. Vincent has been on the phone with the owner for an hour." Sarah straightened her apron. "Who?" Rosa leaned in, her voice dropping to barely a breath. "The Calabrese family." The glass in Sarah's hand did not shake. She had trained herself years ago not to react visibly to names like that. But inside, deep in the part of her that remembered everything she had tried so hard to forget, something cold and ancient stirred. The Calabrese family. In this city, you did not need to be connected to know that name. It appeared in the newspapers occasionally, always in the context of things that were difficult to prove. Construction contracts, shipping disputes, the occasional prominent figure who had a very unfortunate accident. The patriarch, Enzo Calabrese, was 70 years old and had survived everything the federal government, rival families, and time itself had thrown at him. His son, Marco Calabrese, was the one people were more afraid of. Enzo was old world, a man of ritual and patience. Marco was something newer and colder, a man who had grown up watching his father operate and had decided that sentiment was a liability. Sarah had hoped, foolishly, that she would not be assigned to that table. Vincent found her at 6:15. "Sarah, private room tonight, Calabrese party." She opened her mouth to protest. "That I know," Vincent said, cutting her off. Jessica called out, "You are my best server. You are quiet and you are clean and you do not talk to the guests more than necessary. That is exactly what this table needs." He straightened his tie and looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "Do not make me regret this." Sarah nodded. She went to the bathroom, gripped the edge of the sink, and stared at her own reflection. "You are Sarah Conti, she told the woman in the mirror. "You are from Cleveland. You have been in New York for 4 years. You know nothing about anything. You are invisible." The woman in the mirror stared back at her with eyes that knew far too much. The private room at Caruso's was at the end of a narrow corridor lined with old black and white photographs of the Italian countryside. The room itself was small and intentionally intimate. Dark wood paneling, a single round table, candlelight, and walls thick enough that whatever was said inside stayed inside. It was the kind of room that powerful men requested specifically because it felt like a confession booth, sealed from the outside world. Sarah stood outside the door with a bottle of Barolo in her hands. She had served politicians, celebrities, and Wall Street criminals in this restaurant without blinking. She told herself this was no different. She pushed the door open. There were 5 men at the table. 2 were clearly security, positioned near the walls rather than seated to eat. A third was a heavy-set man in his 60s with silver hair and a careful, measuring expression that suggested he had spent a lifetime calculating risk. That was Enzo Calabrese. She recognized him from the newspapers. Beside him sat a younger man, mid-30s, in a dark charcoal suit with no tie. His face was angular and serious, and he was reading something on his phone with the focused intensity of a man who found very little in the world worthy of his full attention. That had to be Marco. The 5th man at the table she did not recognize. He was perhaps 40, broad-shouldered, with the kind of tan you only get from spending real time outdoors rather than in an office. He was laughing at something Enzo had said, and the laugh was genuine, which surprised her. "Good evening," Sarah said, her voice at exactly the right volume. Soft enough to be unobtrusive, clear enough to be professional. She presented the wine to Marco, who glanced at it briefly and nodded. She opened the bottle. She poured. She was a machine, precise and efficient and utterly forgettable that IT was going perfectly until Enzo Calabrese, in the middle of a sentence directed at the man she didn't recognize, switched languages. He did not switch to Italian. Anyone at that table would have expected Italian. He switched to something older, something that came from a very specific valley in the mountains of Calabria, a dialect so regional and so ancient that it had essentially died out with the generation that had emigrated a century ago. It was kept alive only in the homes of families who had come from that one particular place and had chosen, deliberately, to preserve it as a kind of private code. Enzo said, roughly translated, that the arrangements in the port were solid but the timing needed to move before the end of the month or the window would close. Sarah's hand did not shake. She continued pouring. She moved to the next glass. But her brain had heard every word with perfect clarity. Because it was the language of her childhood kitchen. It was the language her grandfather had sung in. It was the language she had been forbidden to speak for 4 years. The language she had buried so deep inside herself she sometimes wondered if she had imagined ever knowing it at all. She finished pouring. She set the bottle down. She was almost at the door. Then Enzo said something that stopped her blood cold. He said, in that ancient, buried dialect, the name of the man she had been running from for 4 years. She did not gasp. She did not turn around. But her hand, just for a fraction of a second, pressed flat against the doorframe. Marco Calabrese looked up from his phone. He had not been watching her before. He was watching her now. She walked out. She made it to the service corridor before her knees threatened to give way. She stood against the cool wall, breathing through her nose, counting the way she had taught herself to count when the panic came. For counts in, hold for 4, for counts out. The name Enzo had spoken was Roderio, Fausto Roderio. And if the Calabrese family was doing business with Fausto Roderio, then the careful, invisible life Sarah Conti had constructed over 4 years was in far more danger than she had understood. Because Fausto Roderio was the man who had ordered her father's death. And he was also the man who had spent 4 years looking for the one person who had witnessed it. Her. She had been 20 years old, home from her first semester of college, sitting in the kitchen of her family's house in a small town outside Naples when she had overheard the conversation she was never supposed to hear. Her father had been a bookkeeper, a quiet man who understood numbers and kept his head down. He had not been in the life, not really, not in any meaningful way, but he had kept the books for a man who was very deeply in it. And one night he had discovered a discrepancy that was not a mistake. It was deliberate. It was evidence of something that would have sent several very powerful men to prison for a very long time, that he had made the mistake of mentioning it. 3 days later, her father was gone. And the men who came to the house looking for his records had not known that his daughter was hiding in the cellar, pressed against the cold stone wall, listening to them tear apart everything her family had built. She had run that same night. She had run with nothing but the clothes she was wearing and the knowledge in her head, the knowledge of what was in those books, the knowledge of what her father had found, and the knowledge of the name of the man who had ordered everything Fausto Roderio. And now his name was being spoken, casually, over a $1,500 bottle of wine, 12 feet away from where she was standing. Rosa found her in the corridor. "You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm fine," Sarah said. "Just a headache." Rosa studied her for a moment with the particular perception of a woman who attended bar for 15 years and could read a face the way other people read a newspaper. Then she handed Sarah a glass of cold water and walked away without asking any more questions. Sarah drank the water. She squared her shoulders. She had one option, which was to finish the shift, go home, pack the single bag she kept ready under her bed for exactly this kind of emergency, and disappear again. A new city, a new name, a new shadow to become. She was good at disappearing. She had done it before. She walked back to the private room.